Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you, everybody, for allowing us to do that. And we shall now get into understanding or trying to understand the more important things that we have to work out here. And that is that we are in a different zone. Is it a time zone? Is it an era? Or what is it exactly? This is part of the KESH America Knowledge Team meeting. And our zone is in the post-Sanya conference era. The Sanya conference was a watershed moment. Unlike other conferences, it was allowing the user experience to experience the plasma reality. And as you can see, one of the realities, of course, is the ability to produce as much gold as we need. So, and of course, produce it on demand. This is pretty important because financial security and financial stability is essential for world peace. This is the KESH Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We're just finishing off the basic transition series. Interestingly enough, it's called the Peace Dome. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is May 19th, 2024. This is the KESH Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So I hope you'll please enjoy the trip. It's a continuation of our basic teachings, which we started in 2020. And we are at the last of a set of 6 of what we call the basic transition. We discussed x-axis orbitals, the potentiation of hydrogen, selection, folding deviation. Last week was the transition range. And we're going to discuss the Peace Dome. Most of the members of the Knowledge Seekers team know what the Peace Dome is, but for the record, we have to find out where it is, and maybe better to know where it isn't. So it isn't on the hesitancy highway because that's the lowest energy state. And we understand how life is hard. So we say, well, it gets a lot easier when you get up on the horse, but you know, you got to be careful. You've got to pick the winning horse. And of course, we all want a piece of the action. Is the Peace Dome part of that piece? I wonder. And we've discussed the references to the books of Marin Tabakoli Kesh, book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And this is important where we're bringing 3 dimensions of matter together. And so we have the fundamental creation. But in book number 2, we have the structure of light, which has 2 fundamental structures of creation. And there's a link in between the 2. And I say, well, where did the 2 come from? So we look at book number 3 and we look at the origin of the universe, and where one field becomes two fields. And so, isn't that interesting? Shouldn't book number 3 be book number 1? Well, understanding that plasma science is a two-way street, we also have to understand that as the planet that we're on, it has already learned this lesson. It's us who has to learn the lesson, and we've been trying for 326 weeks in a row to understand how one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace manifests itself. And so we have to see that there's a collective desire and fulfillment of that desire. And it stems from our search for outer space. Because what we're doing in outer space is trying to get on that plasma highway to share that piece of pie in the sky somewhere. And keep talking about this piece of pie, and it's not that little red spot in the man's universe there, that tiny little perfect world, but it's the spherical shape of the universe. And see the rest of the universe, and we say, okay, well, we travel through the universe on the plasma highway, and how do we get on that? Well, we just left the transmission highway, and we're trying to navigate the transition highway, and then we find that the transition highway is a lot more complicated than we gave it credit for, because we have some understanding that has been always flawed, and that had to do with the universe embodiment range. So we thought that the speed of light was the fastest transmission. And of course, that would only stand to reason if we are in a little tiny perfect world and we look at the rest of the universe and how large it is. How do we get there, and how do we get there in a timely fashion? So we must get there approaching the speed of light. And if we do, and we see that the universe embodies everything, so maybe the faster we go, the bigger we get. Well, that obviously is not the real reality. We have our own little pie chart where we start to see that in our pie, the speed of light is constant transmission. And then we see that the universe is only 70% hydrogen. Well, is that true? And if that is true, then how do we move around? And how do we know where to go? And, where are we? Are we here, or are we there? And, do we have a map? But then what happens beyond? And so we find that the beyond really is beyond our own little MagGraph pie chart. And that's still a difficult story. And yet there's a beyond. And beyond to what? Well, this is why we're going through the transmutation preparation sessions. And this month we just had our 5th session. Next month will be the last in this set of 6. Let's call it a 6-pack. So the next session is June the 21st. And everyone can join in. There is a fee, and there is no pre-qualification, except to say that desire for peace is fundamental if you wish to be successful. So this week, as a matter of fact, 2 days ago, we had a transmutation shocker as we went on the 5th session. And it was a real failure that I called the jailbreak failure. The doors were open to the prison, but the prisoners couldn't escape. Now, we are all severely addicted to the lowest energy delivery system. And in that way, even though we were all prepared and ready to go, we suffered a blowout. And it was pretty much a universal failure. We were not able to transmute. And so what does that say about us? Well, we understand our gravitational conformation. why does it have to be so gravitational? And when we look at how the energy is traveled from the sun to the earth and from the earth to the sun, and the combination from and from beyond, and the convergence of all these forces, bring us this hydrogen. And we know it's hydrogen because it has a unique fingerprint. We can see it. It's called a spectrum. And so that spectrum is the coming together of forces of energy, antimatter, dark matter, and matter state, as we see on the Magrath pie chart. And so this energy is coming together in the form of what we call principal matter. It comes as an energy pack. It's a nice wrapped up parcel. But inside that parcel are different energy levels. And so we get to select the energy levels. But these energy levels are a two-way street. So we get some energy from the sun, we get some energy from the earth. And since the sun is in motion around the galaxies and the earth is in motion around the sun, and then of course the earth rotates and we rotate right with the earth, and that's a good thing. And yet nothing gets very scrambled unless we start dropping bombs all over the place. But we get oxygen now, and that too is a gravitational confirmation. But the difference between the oxygen and the hydrogen is that the oxygen is highly magnetical. And as such, it really, really contributes to this gravitational format. And we can see it. And it only makes sense. So the oxygen on the periodic table of elements is much stronger, has more mass than the hydrogen. So it stands to reason that it would be more gravitational. But this is a unique characteristic that oxygen has, and it's a precursor for life on this planet, because oxygen and hydrogen coming together create water in the form of what we call H2O. And of course, this is the solvent of life, and water is kind of essential for life on this planet. But interestingly enough, if the hydrogen is magnetical and the oxygen is gravitational, and the combination creates a Magrath condition, well, how can they be round when we have this teeny tiny hydrogen and this big fat oxygen coming together? That doesn't look very balanced to me. But a unique characteristic of the water, it has this capability to shear off one of these electrons, which we call a positive hydrogen ion. And the positive hydrogen, it goes somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where it goes, but we're left with a negatively charged hydroxyl. It's negative charge because it's lost some positive energy. And it too is seeking to combine with something. So now we have a single hydrogen and a big fat hydroxyl, and they're both seeking. And what they're seeking is to be able to come together with another for the purposes of balancing. This is fundamental for energy and motion. So therefore, the charge is the energy in motion, not the energy itself. So the negative and positive relationship has to do with the direction of flow, where the negative gives and the positive takes. But then we see that if the negative can give and the positive take from itself, that creates a binding. But the energy also, we know, is flowing. So it has two factors. It can flow or it can bind. And so this is the basis of the creation of the universe. It exists from energy, and it's always positive, but because it's always in motion, it has this charge. And so therefore it'll go from one Magrath position to another Magrath position. And in that, it has to have a structure in order to be able to do that. And so there has to be a Magrath condition in the structure of the light so that the energy from one can go to the energy of the other, but is that all the same energy? Is that all the same energy on the same energy level? And if all things are working in combination, then there has to be a balance. But that balance is not achievable. That balance is simply desirable. And in that process, things are constantly moving to that balance point. And so either moving to or moving away from, moving to or away from in one energy level, or moving away and moving to two different energy levels. Regardless, it's seeking a balance. So when we look at the cup of inertia, isn't that what the cup of inertia is? It's a combination of two fields. And in it, what we've done is we've set up a cup where we have a nano-coated copper coil and another nano-coated copper coil and a nano-coated copper plate. So could we say that the two nano-copper coils are identical? No, we cannot. Because, first of all, they're not in the same position. And that's really all that matters. And then, of course, the third one is not a coil, but a plate. And so the combination of these has created a magnetical field and a gravitational field. So with the gravitational field at the core and the magnetical field at the periphery, and this being the cup of inertia. So all of them seem to be nano-coated, and yet there is a process. And we see that we can create other cups of life, such as the cup of emotion and the cup of physicality. And they too have this nano-coating process within. So now we understand that this nano-coating process is part of the monatomic science, different from the atomic science, which is in the physical state. So the monatomic science is the connector between that nebulous point somewhere that represents that core space interacting with our inner space and is representing our emotional strength. But when we think of strength, we think of physical strength. So we have to understand that there's a physical emotion and there's a plasmatic emotion. And then we have to understand that there's a physical strength and a plasmatic strength, because it's a two-way street. And so the nano-coating process is strictly an intermediary. It's strictly a basic transition. And so we transitioned from the cups of life, where we created the physicality, we added salt water, and we really added nothing else. And we ended up producing this GANS radiance manifestation of calcium GANS, copper GANS, zinc GANS, carbon dioxide GANS, amino acid GANS, and water GANS. And so these were all new things that we've created, and now we've added gold GANS. And of course, we can have a GANS of every element on the periodic table of elements. We just have to know how to build these cups, and each of them is a cup of life. But we use the physicality in conjunction with the nanocoating monatomic structure of copper, and we created GANSes of another energy state. And so we find that the basic physicality is all part of the transmission state, the basic transmission state, which involves the x-axis rotation, the y-axis polarity, and the z-axis field strength. So we see the difference in the various field strengths, the various periodic elements, as having different field strengths. So in understanding our basic terminology of transmission, transition, and transmutation, we find that when we delved into the basic transmission, it involved the X, Y, and Z axis. And now we are in the basic transition dimension. And we're still only looking at the X axis. This doesn't make sense. We have 3 dimensions in the basic transmission, and we're discussing 1 dimension in the basic transition. So this only leads us to where we need to go. And so we need to have another dimension, because when 2 forces come together, then you have the beginning of the creation. And when you have one, and then who says that you can't have another? And are they the same? Well, no, they're not. They can't be the same. It is, shall we say, physically impossible. Maybe correctly would be, it's plasmatically impossible. So arbitrarily, one becomes stronger, one becomes weaker. And we don't know which one it is, but when they have a similarity, there might be a point of conflict. And so how can that point of conflict be resolved? Isn't that the question? And so if we are able to deflect that conflict, we can not only dissipate that conflict, but we can create a field where we have a point of containment. And so this is actually very good, because in that point of containment, we can draw more energy and create more things. And when we draw energy, it creates a binding. And this is important because it has a self-serving fulfillment. We need to have that in order to maintain our living condition, our self-serving living condition. But we forget that we were born. And what we remember is how we can steal energy from others. In other words, we become energy binding and therefore self-serving at the expense of others. Well, what about the other point of view? They too want to be energy binding and self-serving. But if you rob them, now they either are going to have a point of conflict with you because you're stealing it, or they're just going to say, well, maybe I'm going to go to something that's weaker and steal that energy. And so it goes, and so it goes. And so we find that this is, how we have come to get used to this field capture, and this is what we see. So this becomes part of our x-axis transition. And we only see this with relationship to the ground that we have. So as we move through this transition zone, we see that we are able to manage a difference in position. So this business doesn't really explain how we can move. So what we have to understand is that the notion of motion is that we have an x-axis rotation around a y-axis of polarity, and the magnitude of the field is the z-axis. And so all of this is moving as a collective, as a unified field. And in the process of moving, it is giving and taking of energy. So we have this field where it gives and moves, and in the process of moving, it can take. And then it repeats, and it keeps on going. And it has to do that in order to keep on going. So we see how the basic motion is happening. And in that process, we see the development that we have other things like Saturn's rings, and these rings are visible. And within the rings, we see visible shadows. But these rings are of a different structure from the body of the planet. And then between the body of the planet and the rings is another gap. So we can rightfully conclude that the gap is as important as what is visible. The gap is as important as the body of the planet, is as important as the rings, as the gap between the rings. Because without the gap, you wouldn't see these things. And then when we look at Jupiter's rings and we look at the side view, well, we have another similar thing. We have a flat main ring and a gossiper ring and a outside ring, and and we have the gaps again. And so it's one ring works like a halo and one ring works like a lens. And it's a two-way street. And so today's discussion is about the peace dome, because the peace dome is somewhere and we haven't decided where it is. But the peace dome is part of your inner space dome, because your inner space is your peaceful place. That's you. That's who you are, whether you recognize it or not, because we're all going through this emotional transformation. So we can understand that when we go to sleep, we go into this dream state, but when we're awake, we're in this man-made state. And then in the meantime, we have all of these intermediary stages like the aminogen and the carbogen and the post-amino acid state. And these are all different transmission states. But the thing is, whether we're in the dream-made world or whether in the man-made world, we carry this responsibility because the rules are the same. And these fields overlap. So they're all working together. How can they work together and overlap? Well, that's the purpose of the gap, isn't it? You have to have this gap so that you have this separation. And so when you look at this potentiation of hydrogen, as we've discussed, it is on a scale of 1 to 14, which represents the difference between the stability and the instability. So it has to do with the potential of hydrogen and its release. So in a complex alkaline state, the hydrogen is bound. But in a simple acidic state, the hydrogen is released. So it doesn't have any more potential. The magnetical hydrogen is not potential energy. It's the gravitational hydrogen that is. And so everything else in between deals with susceptibility. But in the process of releasing the hydrogen, we have to release the oxygen as well, because oxygen and hydrogen both are components of water. And so since the oxygen itself is highly magnetic, highly magnetical, which leads to its gravitational stability, we find that the hydrogen becomes the energy of conversion, and the oxygen becomes the product of the conversion. So the oxygen is either in its liquid state or in its gaseous state or in its plasmatic state. And this becomes very important because it's also part of a DNA transcription, you see, because the DNA itself performs differently with different pHs. And so the range, though, is not 1 to 14, but it's basically 7.3 to 7.46. And so what you're looking at is what is considered healthy is in a considered alkaline state, and what is considered unhealthy is in an acidic state, except at 7.3, it is in a slightly alkaline state. And in fact, in an anaerobic condition, which means no oxygen, which means it's dead, the DNA is dead and it's flat, it is still in an alkaline state. So clearly the reference has to be made to the environment. And that's why in health, the environment is referred to as the terrain. Isn't that interesting? So all of this allows us to make selections. So we have natural selection, and then we also have man-made regulation. And this is what leads to the confusion, because the question is, who are the chosen ones? And you know, are the chosen ones the rulers or are the chosen ones the prisoners? And who does the choosing? Well, I guess we have to answer both of those questions, do we? So when we look at this potentiation of range anomaly, what we find is that whether it is pH of 1 or whether it's a pH of 14, those ranges are extreme. Well, if both ranges are extreme, then what happens at that extreme level? Is what happens at the extreme of 1 the same as what happens at the extreme of 14? Well, no, it's not. The extreme manifests itself in a different Earth space range. And so we have the periodic table of elements. So each and every one of these has navigated through the range of extremes and arrived at its McGrath position, which is not in total balance. It is in a near balance state. In other words, it has a McGrath condition, a balance between the magnetic or gravitational field forces of its existence in the physicality, but to maintain that, it is exchanging energy and giving and taking. And, we can say, oh, well, the air moves, and we can say that the water moves, but, does the ground move? Well, it does move with an earthquake, but it doesn't have to be that extreme. The Earth is rotating around the sun, so in that basis, the Earth is moving. So all of the periodic table elements are moving. So these are all part of the Earth-based range details, and each of them are maintaining their own specific McGrath condition. And each of them are maintaining it through the process of giving and taking. So we had an opportunity to discuss what is the difference between the plant chlorophyll and the human hemoglobin. And so we see that the structure, the star formation with the nitrogen and the magnesium is similar to the star formation of the nitrogen and the iron in the human hemoglobin. And in fact, on examining the two structures, there's a remarkable similarity. And so whenever there is a difference, and it seems like there's a minimal difference, but it's a difference enough to create a different gravitational condition for the magnesium or the iron, because let's face it, when we look at the magnesium, it has a mass of 12 and the iron has a mass of 26. So clearly in that regard, they're not the same. But what we can say is that the iron is more dense than the magnesium. And so therefore the iron is more gravitational and the magnesium is more magnetical. And so this becomes now a way that we can apply our knowledge when we look at these things and say, okay, which way is the direction of the energy flow and what is transpiring in that process? And then also we have to understand that this is a two-dimensional picture, and we have to see that there are three dimensions operating here. And we also have to understand that it's not static. The poles themselves flip. So the reason for the flipping has to do with the representation of the giving and taking. So this is a basis not only for how the energy exchanged. When we look at the plant chlorophyll, that would be the blood of the plant, and the human hemoglobin would be the blood of the human. But when we look at the magma, which is the blood of the earth, And we see that the Earth, in order to maintain its maggrav condition, the energy has to come in and more has to come in. So this is the attraction process of the gravitational force fields, and we call that absorption. But in order to maintain that, it has to emit out and more energy has to go out. And so this is what we call repulsion through the plasmatic force fields of magnetical repulsion. And so there's a range. There's a range between the core and there's a range between the magnetosphere. And so we find that there's a vacuum in the core and there's a vacuum around the magnetosphere. And so everything else that we have is in between these two. So this becomes the maggrav range. And of course, there's a balance, but it isn't perfect. There's a flowing to, there's a growing to balance. There's a movement to balance. So when we look at the potentiation of hydrogen, and we see that pure water should have a pH of 7. But we know that there's water that's acidic and there's water that's alkaline. And so through the process of electrolysis, if we were to split up water, we would find that if we split up the balanced water of 7 and say created a pH of 5, that would be acidic. And then if it would create a pH of 9, which would be alkaline. And the reason for that is 9 and 5 is 14. So the pH scale is always 14. So the total of the water splitting is always 14. So it's constant, which means that when we look at the pH of 7, we have to understand that it is a combination of acid and alkaline, and the total is 14. And so it is in perfect balance. And well, isn't that one of the reasons that water is transparent? I guess it could be. But when you look at the materialization selection of other things, like for instance, gold and copper and oil, and we find that generally speaking, they're location specific, right? That they all gather together in the same location, and yet the Earth is rotating all the time. Well, how do we achieve this location positioning? So a lot of the factors have to do with our neighbors. And so when we look at the position of the copper, and we see that that's in Chile, and the position of the gold, and that's in Indonesia, and the position of the oil, and that's in the Middle East, and there's a reason for that. And even though the Earth is floating around all the time and rotating at a high speed, it all seems very well organized, doesn't it? So we have to understand that there's energy flowing all the time. And so this is all part of the two-way transmission. So we talk about two dimensions and two-way streets and two directions and two sizes, two variables, two lanes. And so we always have these two selections. And this is how we're looking at not just the x-axis dimension, but the y-axis dimension. But we also have to look at how the x-axis dimension travels on the y-axis dimension. And if that is sounding confusing, well, we have to understand that when we look at these relationships, they can be on the same level or between the levels. So let's say, for instance, if we're looking at maggrav relationship, which is a balance between magnetical and gravitational force fields, and we look at the scientific community, well, there's a balance between the conservation of magnetical fields versus the conservation of energy. And then how does that relate to the spiritual community? Well, the spiritual community has to deal with the spirit and the soul. And so there's a balance of energy between those two. And so magnetic fields balance energy fields, and the spirit balances the soul, but the scientific community balances the spiritual community. And you say, well, what are the fundamental parts of these relationships? And so we see that the plasma science is what's adding to the knowledge and explaining how this is all working together. Because what we do know is that the conservation of energy is that energy can neither be created nor be destroyed. It's only from one form of energy to another. And so even when we look at the pH scale, we see, well, there's an initial kinetic energy and initial potential energy. Well, that's good, but the add those two together is equal to the final kinetic energy and the final potential energy. And all the energies in between. So as the kinetic energy diminishes and the kinetic energy, the final increases, then we find that it's inverse with the potential energy, but it's always in balance and it's always constant. Isn't that strange? It's always constant. So the acid plus the alkaline always totals 14, and the potential and the kinetic is always constant, but the acid is oily and the alkaline is wet. And so we find that gravity seeks density, and oxygen is more dense than hydrogen, and the combination of the two always comes out to a pH of 14, whatever it is. So it has the capability of taking other things into account. And the ability to take these into account affects the susceptibility of the potentiation of strength. So we find that the alkaline water is stronger and the acidic water is weaker. And when we look at the relationship, we find that the gravitational is stronger and the magnetical is weaker. And so this is just a reference point, not a commentary. It's a point of reference between the initial potential and the final potential. So there are sequence orders. We see the gravitational feedback, which is part of the attraction, and the magnetical feeding, which is part of the repulsion. And we, as the last man standing, make those choices. We have to make those choices. We can't abdicate them. No, they're our choices, because we can turn on and turn off the feeding. We can increase and decrease the strength, and we can enhance or diminish the positioning. So we do this because the stronger feeds the weaker. You don't demonstrate your strength by how much you pound your fist on the table. And that's where the problem lies. So when we look at the speed of light and we say, well, that's constant, and we know that it's constant because we say, well, we have different lights. Yeah, but each of them has a relationship between the wavelength and frequency. And when you balance those out, you find that the speed of light is constant. So the pH is constant, the relationship is constant, the energy is constant, the speed of light is constant. So if all of these things are constant, well, how do we get this variety? So we can see that the variety has to come together with the approach to balance. The approaching to balance or the deviation from balance, not the achievement of balance. So in other words, the balance is virtually unachievable. So, and our proof of the speed of light being constant is because of the different frequencies. So if we want to have a higher frequency around a particular pole, then we have to have a smaller diameter, because if the speed of light is constant, then the distance it travels over time is constant. So by shortening the distance, in other words, shortening the radius of the cycle, we increase the frequency. And that's why the blue light is gravitational and the red light is magnetical, right? So they are all part of the whole structure. They are part of the whole structure. What part is part of the whole? Well, that's all dependent on the selection process. And this is what we're saying. So when we have the selection process, then we have these different layers. So if we were to select 4 on the pH scale, then we would select 10. There's a selection right away. 10 and 4 is 14. But if we chose 6, then we would have to choose 8. 6 and 8 being 14. So the selection in either case would exclude 5 or 9. So this is pretty important in order for us to understand how energy is converted. So we have different layers. These are all different potentiation layers. And so think of it as a zipper. If you were to pull down the zipper, and as you get towards the extremes, you find that the lower you go on the acid side, the higher you have to go on the alkaline side to balance everything out. And so then the question becomes is, well, how do we move from one pH to the other pH? And this is where the transmission comes in. So when we look at Dino Kraspedon's mathematic equations, and we see that God is a set of mutually perpendicular lines of force oscillating upon themselves, we find that each axis has to take its own direction and its own position, and it has to work perpendicular to each other. So you find that every time this happens, there is a bend in the road. And so when these bends in the road come, we find that the energy is created due to surface to volume ratios. And so we see when we have 2 dimensions, we have 2 positives, 2 negatives and 1 positive. And when we have 3 dimensions, well, we have 3 negatives and 3 positives. Well, 1 bend, and we created 2 more positives. That's terrific. That's a really good deal. And so if we create the 3 bends, well, we go from one point to the other point. And we find that this makes a charge connection. And then if we add another, and that makes a connection, now we can attract 2. So we have a path, and we have a link, and we have a connection. And we find that we now have more. What was the basic x-axis transmission has now included another x-axis transition. And this is what we see when we look at the fatty acid chains, how the amino acids link up to produce fatty acids. And so we look at these bends in the road. But the thing about these bends is that they are not just 2-dimensional bends, they actually rotate. Then the question becomes is, which direction do they rotate and which direction do they bend? And so a lot has to do with the nearness and proximity to the neighbors. And what neighbors are they? And then what is the potentiation of your existence? And what is the potentiation of the neighbor's existence? And how do they work together? So we see that there's a correlation between the two. And then we see that there's a dynamism that happens where we have, your basic omega-6 fatty acids have 2 bends, and omega-3 fatty acids have 3 bends. And we find that these are what we call essential fatty acids. And the reason that they're essential is because they're essential for cell building. And in the process of doing that bending, we see the evolution of this nanobiology, which involves the crossing over and the deflection and the twisting. And in that twisting, based on the pH, we either see a tightening or a coiling, and then also a residual manufacture of tunneling. And then within that tunneling, we can see a tightening and a coiling as well. And so all of these things are manifestation of energy packs in motion. So this is all part of the nanobiology, which we understand, and these are all part of the energy parceling units, which are energy packs in motion. Well, how do they travel? How do they twist? How do they convey energy? And so we find that they have to constantly flip. And as they flip 90 degrees and it creates a twisting. And then they flip and give energy, and then they twist, and then they give energy and twist and give energy and twist. Every time they twist, they take. So it's a give and take and give and take and give and take. And so because of the difference between the hexagonal gravitational structure and the pentagonal magnetical structure, we see that there's a charge gradient. And so opposite charges attract. So clearly, it's the attraction and the repulsion which causes the twisting susceptibility. And so we see that is in the structure of protein. And we found that in the discussion of the structure of DNA, we find that the DNA is the same in all of our cells. And yet I have a left thumb and I have a right thumb. How can the DNA be the same? So the DNA is not the deciding factor. And then we find the viral RNA history. And we find that there's a folding process that goes on. And so we find that the virus is a folding facilitator, and it folds the amino acids into a protein. But we find that isn't just one virus. There are different viruses with different characteristics, but they work together and they create a structural unit. So if we understand charge, we see that the orientation of the folding changes the charge. And since we have different viruses, we have different orientations. And it is these orientations which allows for the uniqueness of the structure and the variety. And so when that comes together, that structure then creates a chain. And so the process has to begin again until another chain is created. But that chain has to do with the feeding of the RNA, which feeds the DNA, and then the mRNA, which feeds back to the DNA. So there's two. There's two feeding paths. So we have an RNA feeding path, which is part of the feeding state, and we have an mRNA feedback, which is part of the feedback state. And in between, we have the matogen state, which is adapting. And so we know that the DNA will adapt with the pH and change in the pH terrain. So it'll either contract or expand, and it'll either be healthy or dead as a doornail. And so when we look at how things are working together, we have to decide, is that a reflection or is that an illusion? Well, this is where the peace dome comes in. The peace dome is shielding us. It helps us with the selection of the RNA feeding. But we have another dome that's shielding us from the mRNA feedback. And the reason for that is because we have this matogen reflection state. So the reflection is between the RNA feeding and the mRNA feedback. And what is happening is a constant seeking balance, moving towards balance, not achieving zero balance, but on the road to balance in the giving and taking of energy. And this is what makes life so wonderful. We have this matogen reflection state, which balances both fields. And so this becomes part of what we call the folding transmission. In other words, it's the motion of the folding position. Once the position is assumed, the folding position as a position that becomes the mainstay and the precursor for the next folding position. So the second folding position has to move. And then once that is maintained, then the third folding position has to move. And so what you see is the beginning of the overall folding, repositioning, rotation, and the road to balance, this part of this folding transmission. So if we want to increase the susceptibility, then we have to go through this transmission transition. So the transition becomes the transmission susceptibility. And we can transition to a pH of 5 or a pH of 6. But understand that when we create one, automatically there's a creation of another. We don't necessarily know where it is. It could be on the lower x-axis transmission, or it could be on the higher x-axis transmission. But the higher x-axis transmission has gaps. So it could be in the gaps. And when we look at what happens with the gaps, and we see that in the pH of 5, we have a lower pH and a higher pH, and each step up is an order of magnitude. But when we get to the extreme, either the bottom of the stairs or the top of the stairs, we have to change into a different pH. We have to bridge that gap. So the bottom of the higher pH is actually a higher than the lower pH at its high point. So it isn't just being at the top of the stairs. And you know that. If you go to the top of the stairs from the first floor to the second floor, you only get to the bottom of the stairs going to the third floor. Doesn't that make sense? But what we're doing here is we're on the same level. So we're going from a lower pH to a higher pH, and this is part of our susceptibility. It doesn't answer the question, how do we choose that susceptibility? It just shows that there is a susceptibility. So we see that this folding deviation is resolved. You choose one select pH, it automatically gives you the other. So different viruses have different folding, and of course, different folding causes different organs. So now we understand how the variety is created. And now we understand that it's not from the DNA. The DNA is just basically your blueprint, but the blueprint is the same for everything. So it is not the deciding factor. It is the RNA. And the RNA that we see is not the deciding factor. That is the feedback. The RNA that is deciding the factor is the RNA in its energy pack form, which we call the virus. And so that becomes part of the standard deviation. And so we see that we can go to a higher level through the x-axis transition from the lower transmission, but we have these gaps. And so it kind of defines our range. And as we try and structure each of these, and we take into account how each one is created, it doesn't answer the full question. because there's no accounting for starting at one point and ending at the other point, because they're all the same. If they're all the same, then where's the deviation? Where is the variety? Where is the determining factor? So there is an unseen factor. But wait a minute, even that unseen factor is the same in each. Well, maybe we have an unseen transmission susceptibility of the x-axis, and we have an unseen transition susceptibility of the x-axis. In fact, maybe our range goes beyond the range of what we are thinking about. Maybe what we're seeing here is the monatomic folding range. Maybe what we're seeing here is only the nanocoding that's only one stairway up. And in that nanocoding process, we are able to create Ganses of every element of the periodic table of elements within this range. But the physicality of the periodic table of elements within this range are physical. What we created in the cups of life is Gans, which is of a higher range again. So when we look at this water creation transition, and we see that the water in its liquid form is water. But water is not, all water is not just water. Water has a characteristic. So we know it has a pH change. And in that pH change, that's a potentiation of hydrogen. So that becomes part of the pH transmission, right? So when you pick one pH, you automatically pick another. So you have this water creation transition. But that's the transition range that we seem to account for in our everyday life. What we don't take into account is this peace dome transcendence, because this peace dome transmission comes from beyond. This peace dome transmission contributes to the creation of hydrogen, which contributes to the creation of oxygen, which contributes to the creation of the universal solvent of life on this planet known as water. So the condition under the peace dome is the condition that gives us the differentiation of life on this planet. So the same environment for this planet is creating different species. So the environment, the Earth space, is overlapped by our environment, which is the man space. And then, of course, we have all the vertical people space. And then hidden in is all the horizontal people space. And all of these are overlapping. And they're all under this peace dome that has offered us a capability of differentiation. And it's manifest all of this physicality. So therefore, the peace dome itself creates an attraction field. And in that attraction field, we create the magnetical characteristic of oxygen, which is highly gravitational. And so through the creation of the hydrogen, we have the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. So this becomes part of the universal solvents of life on this planet. And since that is the condition, then this peace dome is what creates this attraction field. And with that attraction field, it attracts the soul of the man, which attracts the soul of the body, which attracts the soul of the physicality to the environment of the soul of the earth, which has already been attracted because it has created the soul of the body of the earth. And then this peace dome becomes the attraction point for all the transitory souls that are traveling throughout the universe that don't have this capability of manifestation in the physicality. But what we do have is the attraction of the souls of the vertical people and the souls of the horizontal people. And we also have the peace dome attraction of the souls of the universal community. Because the universal community wants us to make that jailbreak. But we don't understand the negative charge principle, where the negative gives and the positive takes. And so the energy can be flowing or binding. And it is not something that you do physically. The energy packs come as a charge gradient. And then they come in a gradient charge. And this affects the lifespan. So when we look at the two things that we see with respect to our medical, which is deciding the difference between filterable things like bacteria and non-filterable things like viruses, we see that the characteristic of bacteria being orders of magnitude larger than viruses, being aerobic or anaerobic. So that has to do with oxygen, or viruses, which are dependent on a host. They're transferred from host to host. So what does that mean the bacteria does? Well, the bacteria keeps the host alive. But if the host is no longer alive because the terrain has changed to an anaerobic condition, then the bacteria digests the host. And so there's no host left. And we know this is true because the mortality rate amongst morticians during the pandemic was the lowest of all. So we see the host manifestation is due to the folding, and it causes energy depletion, you see, because the physical is at a lower energy state. So there has to be an energy reduction. And that manifestation causes energy absorption, because now that energy is in the gravitational state. And then we can get into extremes. But we can undo these extremes by going back to the peace dome. Because we see that if we allow the extremes to continue, then that deviation, which is essential for folding, becomes degeneration. And the repulsion, which is essential for magnetical feeding, turns to revulsion. So they're both extremes, but they're not the same. One in the magnetical lacks absorption, and one in the gravitational creates a different kind of folding decay. So the range transition modification supersedes genetic modification. So the range transition modification is plasmatic, and the genetic modification is physical. And so this is important for us to understand, because in the application of a conditional effect on unconditional targets leads to targeting failure. The feeding of the human condition is unconditional. As soon as you start to apply conditional effects, you lead to limitations, shall we say, in growth, in health, and quality of life. And so this is our feedback summary. What we see is the light. What we hear is the sound. We feel the heat and the pressure, and we admire the luster, the superficiality. But within it, we see there's a laminar containment. And so all of this is part of the x-axis transmission dimension transition. And it's the dominance of the man-made range that causes the deviation. So we find that in our feedback, the conscious awareness overrides the unconscious awareness. And that sounds contradictory. That is to say that the unconscious awareness is not aware. No. The unconscious is always aware. Hello, remember, you were born. How did you do that? So when we look at fear and the potentiation of fear anomaly, we find that the terrorist fear is man-made. And then man also says, well, you need to be God-fearing. Oh, wait a second, those are two extremes. Why would you be God-fearing if it was God-made? So if your wish is for freedom, love, and world peace, then you have to understand that the potentiation of fear is the difference between the fearlessness of God-made and the fearfulness of man-made. And so, yes, this disappointment that we had on Friday with respect to the transmission training failure is the fearfulness. Because the peace dome has an intention. And the peace dome intention is a return to balance, trying to achieve the balance. And in that process, it does other things. And so there's a return to sender. There's a return to intention. There's a return to creation. There's a return to the creator. And the peace dome is a representation of the earth space intention. So accounting for the x-axis transmission transition, elevation is from that one step beyond the peace dome intention. That the peace dome intention filters everything to allow the accounting for and the return to balance. So within our transmission spectrum, we are susceptible to the non-visible viral spectrum orbitals. So what we see is the transition of visible transmission spectrums. And there's a spectrum to spectrum susceptibility. So within that range, we're looking at the surface superficiality versus the internal substance. So the surface superficiality is physical. The substance is plasmatic. The physical is gravitational. And the plasmatic is magnetical. And wherever you are in that point of containment, well, that's where you are. And we are in this visible point of containment. And so beyond that is one step. But then you get to the extremes. And that's another step. in both directions. It doesn't end there. So when we're looking at these transmission orbitals, we find that we have an antenna. This is a communication antenna, and it has to stay within this range transition. And all the time, there's a release of binding energy, and that precedes the retrieval of the beneficial energy. So the field release has to precede the field capture. The giving always has to precede the taking. The emission has to precede the absorption. This is all part of motion, and motion cannot exist without coexistence, because motion is a product of this coexistence. Motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. So one state, the plasma dominant, requires a tuning, and that precedes the physical dominant state, which also likewise requires a tuning. So the range transition is by nearness and proximity and not distance. Has nothing to do with distance. So when we look at the P-stone orbitals, and we see that man has a P-stone, but the orbital is not man space centric. The Earth space has a P-stone, but that P-stone is not Earth space centric. The Sun space has a P-stone, but it interacts with the Earth space to create the P-stone of the Earth space. And there, the containment is dimension-centric. The proximity is dimension-centric. The nature of the pressure is dimension-centric. 3 transmission dimensions. And on that rides a message. And how is that message contained? It all depends on which transmission dimension is the folding deviation. The accountability of that is range transition centric. So when we're looking at the universal body enhancement spaceship units, this is part of the food energy delivery system, the drug energy delivery system, the addiction energy delivery system. It's a message delivery system by messenger. So the energy delivery is by transmission selection. You take what you need without intermediaries, and you facilitate standard folding deviation so you can change range transition criteria. And all we need to do is to gain the access to the Peace Dome delivery system. The Earth has already provided that for us. So we have to understand what is the role of man, and what is our ability to create things that are man-made, understanding the difference between the vertical and the horizontal systems. And how do we target outer space when we don't understand the targets of our reality dimension, which is in between the materialization and dematerialization state, which is based on the gravitational magnetical relationship. So here we are in this gravitational Earth space seeking to go into some magnetical some space, which of course is also gravitational. How do we get there? We have to have the courage and the trust in understanding the difference between the different matter plasma dimensions. So we see that the physical is highly gravitational, and it binds us. It's part of the feedback, and it dominates us. It's the plasmatic feeding that is elusive. So we have to understand that our manifestation is actually working as an antenna, and there's a message feeding and there's a message feedback. It's all part of the manifestation, and we can tune this. So the transmission is tuned by its transition. You select one and it's balanced by the force selection of another. It's automatic. And that resulting selections feed manifestation. And the selection manifestation is predetermined by choosing the peace dome of intention. You don't force it. The range transition affects standard folding deviation. So the message manifestation comes to and from the peace dome. We do that with fearlessness, with trust. And we have to understand it. That's why we were born. We were born with fearlessness. We were born with trust. And so when we look at the KAKT space plasma research teams trying to come together to learn more about the limitations of our understanding of our own existence on this planet, because we are in the post-March 15th era of 2024. We have new selection choices, a new selection process. We have to understand that we are inherently in that inner graceful space under the peace dome. And what we're doing there is only part of our earth space. We need to be able to transcend to that transmutation space, the outer space. And we have been broadcasting for 530 weeks, seeking the greater oneness to transcend the limitations of the nuclear science. This is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers. We're learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. And you see that it requires a world peace treaty. It requires you to sign it with intention, with sincerity, with your heart, with your soul, and also with a pen and display it. So then be proud to do that. Is man the reactor of a three-dimensional universe? And can man find heaven through the field transition? Can man go into outer space without a peace dome? I don't think so. Mining the orbitals of the three dimensions of truth, that's what we're about. And we have to stay within the ranges of standard deviation. Aligning the inner space message, range of transition of the physical transition and physical transmission dimensions. Plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of today's lesson, but it is also the end of the basic transition series. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you all for participating.
And thank you, Alex, again and again for continuing to deliver this understanding of the knowledge for all of us to go deeper within ourselves or understanding things. And I'm sure everyone has taken different things from the teaching. But let's open it up, hoping the participants will have some questions. I never realized that the energy in Canada is twice the cost of energy in the United States. What is the reason for all that? Government taxes or supply and demand? What obviously markets are being manipulated, I would think. Why such a difference or twice the price of energy? I've always heard that about Europe, that they had a much more expensive energy, at least at the petrol stations. What's the reason for Canada's excessive energy cost? If you
Well,
know.
as an energy producer, I would say no reason, but what do I know? See, if you it came up in the United States that there was supposed to be 50 cent per gallon tax on I don't know, environment tax or something. I don't know what it was. Just pick a reason. Any reason will do as long as it's a 50 cent per gallon tax. And of course, that was a shocking revelation for a lot of Americans. And so if you do the calculations, well, you're still only half the price of Canadian gas. So even with the 50 cent increase, there's, I don't know, it's time for this game to end. I know one thing that if you ever drive to the capital, like in obviously in the US, it's Washington. I don't know what it's like there, but if you go to Ottawa, it has the lowest price of gas in all of Canada. So our political leaders are always, immune to the sticker shock at the pumps. Well, they probably don't even have to pay for their gas, but I mean, it's just on the way to Parliament, they can see a reasonable price, and sometimes it's 10 to 15 cents a liter less than it is in the rest of Canada, and that amounts to about 60 cents a gallon Canadian. That's just a difference, and it'll be close to $1 a gallon in US terms. So that's not the difference between Canada and the US. That's just the difference between Canada, where I live, and Canada and in the nation's capital. So, how do you justify that? It's also, Canada is the highest polluter, and we pay the highest carbon tax, which is rolled into the energy cost as well. How is that possible when China is the world's worst polluter? And we know that because the reason that China is, anxious to get into the plasma science is because their population is suffering from the pollution, and it's becoming a national catastrophe. So this is what happens when a government is looking after the welfare of their people. They are trying to bring in the kind of technology which will improve the quality of life. I'd say that's a normal process.
Well, I think the rest of Canada should switch suppliers to the one they're using in Ottawa.
Well, when
That was kind of just an aside.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, you're trying to be logical, right? I mean, it is the May 2-4 weekend. I mean, you have to understand that, that's another reason for the price of gas to go up, right?
Gosh. This is like the Roman circus or Bread circus. Every week you're having a new holiday up there.
Well, every week is the May 2-4 weekend in Canada. So you know
that they survived another week. I've often thought about the magma. You mentioned magma and these flowing rivers underneath our feet. And, the magma is about 2,000 degrees to 3,000, 2,500 or something. I don't know exactly. But why is that never considered in the, obviously, heat rises? We know the temperature of the earth is about 55 year round. If you go down about 5 or 6 feet, why has that never been, and that energy must come up to the surface and then released into the atmosphere? That seems like a huge amount of energy or heat flowing under our feet. It's never been attributed to any sort of warming or anything like that. I was just thinking about the magma, but 2,000 degrees, 2,500 degrees is pretty warm.
Like you say, with the warm air rises, and yet we have snow on the top of the mountains. So, oh yeah, these are all, very, very good questions. So, we know that the heat retention of density is increased. So when you're looking at Chinese ancient ovens, you find that the chimney flow actually is directed underneath the floor. And
Okay.
the floor is made of concrete.
Yes, we've seen that with some of Gianni's creations with the rocket stove and things where he actually routes the discharge, the exhaust, through a sort of a concrete bench or pile of sand that's within the dwelling. And they're extracting as much heat out of that as they can.
Right. So that design is illegal in Canada. That is a violation.
Oh,
Code.
okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Even with a double-walled pipe?
As a matter of fact, yes, it has to exit the building. Yes. It also saying likewise for greenhouses. Yes. The exhaust from a propane heater has to be exhausted to the outdoors.
Now, I thought I'd bring up something here. Let me just share the screen and then you can take it back.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It was again about the pain pen. And I was thinking of this loosed harvesting. I've had the pain pen work for me at times, and other times it hasn't worked on a toothache, for example. And is this part of this loosed harvesting? I mean, I didn't want to have the pain that I'm aware of, but he seems to be saying here, you can pinpoint the pain as long as it's not a physical damage there. But he says, those of you who didn't get it or nothing changed, it's the same as the pain pen we sell because that pain stays there because you need it to be there. Because of it, you can confirm your existence. You don't want it to go. And that, you mean we can block it? Is that what's happening with the pain pen? In other words, I have a backache,
Yeah,
so I'm telling everybody about my backache and I'm actually harvesting energy and I like that, but yet I'm keeping the pain at the same time. That,
there you go, asking two questions at the same time. So
yeah,
the loose
go
harvesting is
ahead.
the robbing of energy from someone else. Okay, the life force energy is the loose energy, and you're
So,
stealing that from someone else.
so by telling someone else all my aches and pains and all my infirmities, this is a loose harvesting?
In a sense, yes. But the thing is it's also up to the other person to shield themselves, so they don't leak. Okay, if they just the fact that you're sucking energy doesn't mean that they have to give it. Okay, the loose harvesting is when you abuse. Okay, so through torture, terrorism, fear mongering, that type of thing. Okay, that's loose harvesting because you're doing it against the will of the person and they can't shield themselves from it in that manner. But as far as a failure of the pain pen to eradicate the pain because you are enjoying the pain, it's a form of confirmation, and this is exactly the point. This is what's led to us with the transmutation training failure. All of us were reluctant to leave, and the reason for it is we were just like a sports team sitting in the dressing room all ready to go, and then finally the coach comes in and says, "Oh, yeah, okay, the game's ready to start." And everybody goes out and says, "We're going to be transmuted now." Well, no, you're not, because the transmutation process is not on the physical plane. That's the problem. We become plasma dominant. So, even yours truly here was a flaming failure. But uh, what you have to do is cater to your genuine intent, and you have to trust it and do it in a fearless way. We have been conditioned that the source of the pain is the point of reference. What we have to understand is the point of pain is a manifestation of a source that is unidentified. The place where you feel the pain may not be where the pain originates from. It may not be the place where you need the relief.
But it just seems a hard way to go to live with pain every day, but
No, 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 no. What we're saying here, okay, let me take it to a higher stage here.
go right ahead.
The point being is that when you talk about abuse, there is abuse from others, and there's also self-abuse. But abuse is abuse. And that abuse comes from a internal point of conflict where either in terms of self-abuse, you're allowing that, or in terms of abuse from others through your position. You're in an abusive relationship and you insist on staying there. Well, guess what? You're going to continue to get abuse. Are you able to change it? Well, you would have to put up a very strong shield, but that gets tedious as well. So sometimes the best solution, if you hurt your head by banging against the wall, the best solution is to stop banging your head against the wall, and then the pain will go away on its own. And this is what I'm saying about the pain pen. You may be having an internal conflict which is manifesting itself in a physical pain in a certain part of the body. And so your positioning of the pain pen is misguided, is, shooting at the wrong target, if you will. And this is where the Universal Body Enhancement Spaceship Unit is providing the solution, because it is providing all the energy that you need. You just take what you need. But since it is targeting the soul, it's not asking the physicality what it needs. It's asking the soul what it needs, because the soul is getting the feedback. And the soul sees that the physicality is not getting what it needs for whatever reason. So by providing all the energy, it allows the soul to select, and it doesn't discriminate in terms of, well, today we're going to give to the liver and tomorrow I'm going to give to the spleen. It doesn't work that way. It provides energy to all the parts of the body that need it. And if there is a resistance, that resistance needs to be fed and dissolved and diminished. So in some points, we have to give energy because there's a lack, needs a supplementation. And in other areas, we have to drain that binding energy to untangle the convoluted field flows that are going through there. It's like a traffic jam. You just basically have to get in a police officer in there to direct the traffic, okay? And just say, let's get everything flowing. So you become that facilitator. And this is the difference between forcing and facilitating. Okay, between the creation through acceptance and the creation through denying. All the denying does is it creates a field of abuse. And we have to understand that the universe is providing unconditionally. It's the peace dome, which has already filtered everything that we don't need. And so that peace dome is unconditional for 8 billion people around this planet, including the vertical and horizontal people, which are not included in that number. So all of those souls are being fed unconditionally through the filtering of the peace dome. So if we want to enhance that peace dome, then, we have to feed the peace dome what it is that we want. And there's too many of us who are sucking the energy and not giving the energy. And so the manifestation of the pain is that gravitational sucking.
Yes, Stefania has put in the chat, the fact you have pain confirms you exist. Plus you bring attention on yourself. It's like addiction. I just want to add this to Alex's great explanation. Thank you, Stefania.
Oh yeah, thank you, Stefania. Thanks for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon. You're welcome. Yeah, I just want to add very shortly, because you said everything very well anyway, Alex. So thank you. Also pain, because people, then it become, so for example, you have pain and that confirm you exist. And then you also create attention on you. So people will start to treat you differently. We start to have extra care. So all these things, you get addictive to it. And then you start to see yourself with the pain. So you also recognize that has become home. So as time goes by, you are become that, you with pain. So when they take the pain away from you, sometimes you can lose your identity. So some people prefer to have the pain than lose the image of what about themselves. So there is a lot of stuff, but I saw many times in my profession where you give a solution to the person, to the problem, and they get better, and then they prefer to stay in the pain because they would not have all the attention they would have without, you know. So it's
Yes.
a
I remember Mr. Kesh talking about the condition of the blind girl, and apparently they corrected the condition and the girl wanted to go back to be blind. And this is just unfathomable to me. But he explains it as she was getting so much more attention. She missed that attention she was getting from everybody, or the sympathies or whatever.
Well,
So,
Mark,
yeah.
I find that when at this point that Stefania brought up, you know, when I address that point, I find that I begin to get relief from that pain immediately. You know, because the for the majority of us, we don't realize we have the pain for that reason. Once that comes into play, and you say, oh, you know, I mean, you really have to be honest and you know, brutal with yourself. You know,
Yeah.
you have to say, hey, are you really, you know, enjoying this pain? Are you really keeping that pain for that reason? I mean, is that really the truth? And you know, when you ask yourself that question, and since you're asking yourself, you can't lie to yourself. So, you know, you can try, but I guarantee you will fail. And then so if you're, well, yeah, I'm going to be truthful. I don't want that pain. And so why am I creating that pain? And then when you ask that question, even though you can't come up with a tangible answer, just the fact that you answered that question suddenly starts to draw energy away from that binding action. And I didn't realize, well, because I was not clairvoyant. I had a clairvoyant explain to me that you know how people lay hands on and they touch you in
Oh,
a
sure.
spot that relieve the pain. Well, this clairvoyant was relieving pain without touching you. And what they would do is they would take these field forces that were going through your aura, and the aura is a representation of your interaction with the environment. And all they would do is they would look at the binding. You know, it would be like a ball of wool, you know, all wound up, you know, and they would just massage it. They wouldn't unravel They wouldn't unravel the string. They would just massage it and kind of, the way you make dough, so say you have a lump of pizza dough and you need to flatten it out to make the pizza pie.
You
So
need to knead it, yes.
you need to knead it. Oh, this is so good. Yes, very good. Though that's what you do. You knead out the binding. And it said, well, how does that work? Well, because the energy flow is disrupted by the physical, there's a physical resistance. There's a physical interference. And say, because I didn't understand that the binding of the aura was a feedback of the physical resistance, but if you understand that the physical resistance is a manifestation of the plasma energy and our interaction with it. So we create the pain. So the pain that we create becomes visible. This is the thing that I had so much difficulty in understanding because I was brought up in the system and I had faith in the system. And I figured if you're paying through the nose, like I paid $208,000 for cancer treatment, I'm dealing with experts. They were experts in draining my bank account. And I let them. It was my fault.
So in certain circumstances, you're saying if you explain to a person that perhaps they're holding on to this for attention, I think most of them would walk away from you, even though that may be the truth of the matter. They
Yeah,
would be
because
so
I am
repulsed by you saying that they're not
exactly.
faking it in a way, but they're not releasing it either, or they don't want to release it. It's almost
It's
like a
about,
badge of honor.
Yes, exactly. Go ahead, Stefania.
sorry, no, interrupt, sorry, because Mark was speaking. It's again, it's all we stand on, it's self-responsibility. So the difference is from someone who recovering, someone who surviving, someone who get rid of something is the very action of doing something, self-responsibility. So a lot of time people end up to be in pain, but then very few, they will take the responsibility, like Alex just explained, of turning to a learning experience and then get rid of the pain, because exactly what you said just now about the dynamics movement, and the all different fields. In fact, is a fact this, any pain will diminish the moment you focus on a movement, any movement, can be eye movement, can be toes movement. And it's exactly because what Alex said, if you change the fields, suddenly the pain is gone. So it's a law. It's not maybe it's a way to diminish pain through movements because you change the fields. So and a lot of time where the problem is, like Alex said, it's not where the pain is. So you will have people with, for example, with 3, 4, 5 herniatic disc, but have no pain. And then you will have, so there are so many things where the structure, a lot of time, it's not really where the problem is. So by changing perception, by start to just introduce movements or the pain just goes. Yes, so I just want to add this. So I think it's addiction, like food, like every addiction that we have. So you get addictive to pain, or you prefer give responsibility to somebody else and not dealing with. But the moment you dealing with, usually it goes, unless, you know, yeah, this, I just want to share this.
Right, and you see this in your work probably on a weekly basis because you're involved with this, but why are people asking for help if they want to keep their pain? Is that a way to legitimize it? Oh, I tried this, it didn't work. I tried that, it didn't work. Nothing works for me. I'm
You
still
can
in pain.
give them the tools. So, for example, you give them the tools to solve the problems, and you see they don't. So, so in that moment, you know, they prefer to be in pain. Otherwise, there would not be any other reason. But as I said, for many people, there are many facets. Some identifying themselves with that pain. So if you take off the pain, so for example, I had a situation where a person was told, no, impossible, you cannot improve. And she improved very, very fast. For her, it was a shock. So had to, she preferred, and someone said to her, you have to, don't do this. And it was something she's really liked to do. And the pain will go. And she prefer actually do what she liked instead of to. So there are many, many things why someone, but I really believe it's like addictions things. And then you will find, yeah, this is my opinion. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
but
They can report the pain, but we don't really know what's cooking in that pot, as they say. Sometimes,
yeah,
yeah, and you see it. You're a regular involved with this, I think, in some of your sessions.
that's why you cannot help unless they ask you. This is a mistake I do.
Good point. Good
You
point.
help unless they, because you interfere with their path. So and then you, so it's always, so that is one rule. You should never offer. And when I do offer, it's always going wrong because the person was not ready. So
Good point. I hadn't considered that often. You know, we have the solution, but you need to wait for the person to actually ask for it. When you force it, it definitely won't work most of the time, I'd say.
because you have to help
Point.
with
Yeah.
wisdom. Wisdom has to be with help. Otherwise, you make a mess. You think you help, but you don't help. Sorry about all.
No, thank you. Thank you for stopping in.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you.
We had a couple members of the Universal Council here today. I think Elizabeth was here as well. What's happening in the Kesh Foundation store? Alex, if you want to take the screen back, fine.
Okay, I guess.
What's happening in our store? Mr. Kesh says it should be shutting down, but what's going to replace that? But at the same time, he's looking for people to supply or add on to their current businesses and put some of these devices in, and there'll be more, he said, when the bigger store opens. But are we going to go through a transition with the store as well, where it'll be completely empty? Or maybe some of these things are already being warehoused. I'm just surprised we don't have a store in the United States, a physical store that I'm aware of, or Canada. Alex, weren't you at one time distributing products, or has that not continued?
Okay, you brought up as a very
Three
sensitive
questions.
subject.
Okay.
No. I think as far as the foundation is concerned, and so I've been a member for many years, and I think I could say this, it has been the weakest part of the foundation. I think it has been the most abused and most susceptible to sabotage of all the things that we're doing. And you know, when you look at the distribution of the products, you find that that's in the hands of the knowledge seekers, whereas the creation and manufacturing the products is in the hands of within the control of the KAKT Foundation. So there are two aspects for me that caused me a lot of disappointment, and I don't mind sharing it. One has been the lead times that they have been unacceptable, and the way to follow up on the deliveries has also been unacceptable. The change in the last year and a half has been absolutely dramatic. We have gone from being a seriously lousy distribution company to being a very, very high quality, very attentive to consumer needs company. That's the only level to achieve, and that has been such a hard process. I find it difficult to understand why it's been such a hard process, but you can clearly see that there's been a lot of people who've been trying to sabotage that. So, in answer directly to your question, I have always opted for the genuine KAKT Foundation products because it has the KAKT Foundation label on it. That's produced by the KAKT Foundation. So that takes that part of the responsibility out of my hands. But as he said, well, anybody can slap a label on it, and that is true. And when you look at a company like well, I hate to mention names of companies like Alibaba, but when you name yourself again after a group of thieves, that's what you get. So they will slap a label on anything. So let's say if you were to order a Mercedes, they'd send you a Chevy and they say order complete. And that's how they conduct business. And I discovered that very early on. So it just goes to show you how people like to abuse. They're deceptive and they just dishonest business. But that's what they do, and it's in the fine print. So you really can't complain because they had full disclosure. So you just can't engage with those people. Well, the KAKT Foundation is not interested in doing that. And so that's one of the reasons that I've wanted genuine KAKT products. So we have not been delivering those in a timely fashion because we haven't been manufacturing them in a timely fashion as well. But the communication was the biggest problem, and that has been resolved. That is outstanding. We are absolutely doing a phenomenal job there, and I'm really gratified with that. Anyone who's been on the transmutation training session is seeing that the response is very, very quick and promptly up to date, and everything's done on a highly professional basis. That's what we need to attain. But there are so many people out there who like to build their own empire. And I, for the life of me, don't understand why that is so important. Because when you start to split up the energy that way, then you create a lot of little pieces. Why they refuse to work under the banner of the KAKT Foundation is just unbelievable. And they insist on doing that. And, it's going to come down to it. You either produce the genuine article or you produce the fake. So there are
Right.
people who are going to
Yeah.
buy the fake.
And
Right.
since many don't know the hidden technologies or the technologies that have never been taught that are within the products, we can't see them, even though the product looks exactly or is a good representation. It doesn't work the same. And he says, then they put the KAKT Foundation label on it and they discredit us. So there'll
Yeah,
be a new logo. It does sound like there'll be a new logo on some of these new products coming out from our new partners.
yeah, but the thing what we have to achieve is we have to achieve a just-in-time delivery system, and be very prompt with that. you look at the failure of many of the electric car companies, right? They promised a delivery date and they failed to achieve it. And some of them are now, you know, they're talking about 2026 and 2028, and you know, we're in 2024. Hello, you know.
Right. I think Musk did that with the self-driving platform there, where I think since 2016 he's saying we're going to deliver very shortly the self-driving car, but I guess it hasn't quite manifested. But he's been promising it almost 10 years.
Yeah, and you know, you're announcing a product that is not going to be available for 2 years down the road. So it seems like we're not doing much. But the thing is that there have been obstacles, and those obstacles have been removed. So now there's a new game. Also, if you understand, in 2018, we had the worldwide broadcast of the testimonial of the Parkinson's case, 2018. Only now, you know, we are on the verge of opening up a hospital in China. So the first one is the difficult one. The next ones will follow very, very quickly, because you know how neighbors are. They will want one, and they will want it at any cost. If you have one, they want one. So this is what we need. We need to have a hospital that can do all the things that allopathic medicine can't do. And that's how you advance. You don't do the things that other people can do. You do the things that they can't do. That's the nature of advancement. So, you know, for you to go out and design a new horseshoe, you know, and put a patent on it, well, that's great. You know, if you're doing a academic school exercise, you know, student exercise. But in the real world, the only thing you can do with horseshoes is play a game, and then that's just another excuse to drink beer. But you know, it's like getting excited about electric vehicles. Well, it's not 1975. If you bring out these electric vehicles in 1975, yeah, we'd all get excited. But 50 years? Really? We've been waiting 50 years for electric vehicles to come on the market, and they still, you know, don't perform properly. That's not advancement. That's just you know, that's just another product. It's nothing really to get excited about. But if we're looking at the possibility of transmutation, and here we are, we went, the door was open, and none of us went through the door. Oh my God, what does that say?
Well, I don't know if he said none of us, but he said many of you, I think, are still holding on to the physicality. You don't want to let it go. Very similar to what he said, this 90% of lack of trust in ourselves. 10% of this is the knowledge, and 90% is the lack of trust.
No, he said all of us, all of us failed.
Okay, it's a test, it's a trial, it's being improved, it's step by step. So I think things have been added during that session.
Well, I'm not, you know, first of all, you made a testimonial, and you actually made progress. Okay. And so now I know where I failed, and I could say that I made progress. And then you were talking about that magical instant. And this happened to me. I'll tell you very frankly that it was probably after about 5 or 6 hours. And it might have even been 6 hours into the meeting. It was really a long time. So this was about, you know, 4 hours after he said it, you know. And I know that I didn't go to sleep, and I had a meeting with a person, and we were discussing some very important stuff. And I said, "Hey, I'm in a meeting and I'm awake." And at that moment, the meeting vanished and I couldn't remember anything. And I said, oh, wait a second, I got to go back to that meeting. You know, the meeting wasn't finished. We were in the middle of the sentence. And then I realized at that point that the moment that I decided to physically acknowledge the transmutation, I failed. The very moment.
We don't fail. Something has happened. You may not have fully noticed it, but as he continues to teach and continues to walk ourselves into our own understanding of our own creation, I think people will, and it's a perfectly set creation. It's a matter of tapping into it. I think people will start to walk away from some of the products that you're making and start using your own MagRav system, at least for feeding. We know it's already 80% there. And the travel, I don't think anybody's going to make a system for transmutation. Any of the knowledge seekers. We're supplementing our understanding with this wellness system, or the, as he said in the video, the transmutation of the soul and the physicality is within the system. So the more we get to understand our the beauty of our own creation, I think more and more people are going to be interested in stimulating ourselves in a way, or getting our reactor, which is already set to work, which is already working in many instances. We know we dream when we sleep. We know 80% of the energy is automatically being absorbed. So we have quite a powerful reactor already. It's just a matter of believing in it and trusting in it.
Yeah, and this is the thing. We want to apply this technology. And in the course of wanting to apply it, we apply a conditional effect. And that's the problem. It's an unconditional target. That's where we had the failure. The moment we apply an unconditional target, then we can succeed. And so this is the whole point. Allow people to marry the so-called awareness with the application. You've heard the comment where people say, oh, you know, I don't know what's going on, but I feel there's something in the air that has changed. Yes, this is the unconditional targeting. So, you know, the fact that you don't know is based on the fact that you want to apply the condition. I want to find out, what is it that is making me feel this way? I want to get to the heart of the matter. Well, there's the problem. You don't want to get to the heart of the matter. You want to get to the soul of the matter.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Anyone else has written down a question or like to make a comment or to bring something up in this meeting? Or prefer to share something?
Well, Mark, I think this has been a great meeting, and I want to thank everybody for allowing me to contribute. I just want to say that we will be carrying on with the intermediate transition sessions to introduce other dimensions of reference and see where we can go from there. And I need to say that your presence and your input has been most valuable, most gratifying, and it really motivates me to keep going with this. And I hope you're getting the benefit in being able to share this with others, but in your own way. And that's what's important. Thanks again.
Wait till I really start to understand it. But as Mr. Kesh says, the more we understand the totality, the more we realize we know nothing. So this is quite a huge body of knowledge. Ying is saying, I can't remember the dream during the session. Anything you'd like to say about that, Ying, or anyone else? And we know we don't remember, or we only partially remember parts of our dreams sometimes. Sometimes we remember more. But I don't know. Again, go ahead.
Didn't Mr. Kesh say that you could effectively be in two places at the same time, and that you can,
Or three.
Yeah, or dreaming is not just at night. You can daydream, but it puts a different spin on the daydream, doesn't it? Because as I say, for just a split second, I remember having this conversation, and it was a two-way conversation. It's like I was part of the conversation. I wasn't just a casual observer or an eavesdropper, or maybe a hovering over the table, looking over people's shoulders to see, who's has the strong hand in the poker game. I was actually at the table talking to the person, and we're having a conversation, and I said, "Hey, I'm not asleep, I'm awake." And boom, that ended the meeting, and I felt so stupid. But that's the hard thing. It is we become so self-critical in that regard, but it's fair, because in order to go on the transmutation training, you can't do it with the physical training that you've had all your life. It's a different set of rules, and these are the rules that matter. These are the rules that we have been avoiding giving the recognition to. And so now we have to see that it is possible. So I was very upset with my own performance on Friday. I was upset with the performance of the group, because I thought surely, that there's got to be some people who can, graduate to the next level, and we were a flaming failure. But I am now really seriously encouraged, because the two things have happened. So one, this point that I shared with you, and you experienced the same thing. So this is very good. But the other thing is what Stefania said about the relief of the pain and stuff like that. I have been experiencing that, and I'm quite grateful for that. And I've had to do some really, really hard searching. Mark, would you mind if I just take another couple of minutes? I
Oh,
just wanted to
definitely.
make
Go right
something.
ahead. Sure. I was going to mention that, but I didn't. Go ahead.
Well, the thing is, I was we find out that this is now possible.
You
Okay.
mean you're going to take the screen, I thought.
No, I just
Oh,
want
you
to,
just
I
want
just
to,
want to,
okay. No,
I
yeah,
just want to
fine.
tell you a personal story, because the personal story is very embarrassing, because I was thinking, here we are, we have this advanced technology. We all of us who went to the transmutation session, and I'm sharing this because there are people who haven't gone to this session, and you need to know what went on, and that is that we were all excited and expectant, and that was the problem. You're not supposed to expect anything, but the moment you say, well, don't expect anything, not doesn't work. So you just hear, so, oh yeah, I expect to go in the transmutation. It's just, yeah, right. Well, you failed. So anyway, and I thought to myself, well, here it is, this advanced technology, and we're not utilizing it. And it kind of gave me the sensation, um, not in the same context, but what Jesus might have thought after he was crucified, because he went through the resurrection and all that, but afterwards he shied away from it, and then basically lived like a human. And I said that at a party once, I remember. It brought to my mind, and I was immediately reprimanded, and I found out that this person was a churchgoer. So, you know, there was no such thing as after the crucifixion. And I was kind of shocked that a churchgoer wouldn't know that, but you know, what do I know? So anyway, I just
Did
thought,
they build a cross for you
well, I thought they were ready
with
to.
your name on it?
Well, yeah, but you know, talk about being a party pooper. But you know what really killed the party is I was my girlfriend uh yelled at me that I had embarrassed her publicly.
Yeah.
And I thought, wait a second, which is worse, you know, to being called out by a Bible thumper or to be called out by your girlfriend? And it's like, why aren't you defending me? And so not only, you know, did that end the party for me, but I went home alone and I realized, you know, I was talking to another friend about that, and he says, "Well, what you should have done is, you know, like a normal young man, you should have, you know, gone to the bar or something and picked up another soup du jour." And well, no, I wasn't going to do that. You know, I was just getting over the fact that my girlfriend, I didn't care about the story. It was just my girlfriend was dumping me in front of everybody. So I went home alone and I went home and alone and sulked. And what was interesting is that I had completely forgotten about that situation. And uh, I wondered how much of an impact did that have? You know, how much of an impact did that have on the rest of my life and my other relationships? And I think it must have had a tremendous impact because, you know, it goes to the heart of what is it that you want from a relationship? And, you know, if you're just looking for a soup du jour, well, you know, that's, I don't know, that's not really an achievement. That's not something that you really should, you know, build your life on. Or is that something for, you know, personal short-term gratification? And so, well, that's again, there's no long-term benefit there. So, you know, if you're looking to build a relationship and then you want to be on a solid foundation and a solid footing. And so there has to be a mutual trust and a mutual admiration and a support. And so that was just what I wanted. And I found out that I was too demanding, you know, too demanding. I wanted more from a relationship. And to me, you know, if I looked at, you know, two lovebirds and how they work together, you know, there's some people on the panel that I think about, and to me, they are in a beautiful, loving relationship, and I'm so happy for them. And I hope, you know, it's not a facade. I hope I hope that it's real. I believe that it's real because I see how they react. But you know, it boils down to one form of abuse or another, and that here we are on the verge of making phenomenal technological advances available to the average Joe. And we're, you know, kind of dropping the ball at that moment.
We went retrograde,
We went retrograde, and you know, I
but we're
I
still in movement. Don't worry.
no, but I think you know this goes back you know the stories that I've read about Jesus and how and I can't vouch how accurate they are, but I was shocked when I seen these stories about how he lived another 60 years after the crucifixion and all this stuff, and how these narratives were etched in stone and these stories were repeated, and that I know very little about that subject, but I mean to even you know discuss that subject was heresy.
Heresy. I was just going to say that word when you
Yeah.
blurted it out.
Yeah, so
Exact same
you
word, yeah.
can't discuss that in a lot of, so I'm not here to debate whether or not that is true or not. This is just my comment was that if you have survived that kind of abuse, like a crucifixion, and then you abandon that technology to live like a commoner, like a mortal human, and enjoy the accoutrements of physical gravitational existence. And this was the thing, and I put this question to Mr. Kesh, and I said, I enjoy this planet. I'm just sad that, we are doing such a bad job of being caretakers here. And I'm hopeful that with this technology that we can, fulfill our purpose to make this heaven on earth. And he said, but you know, it's what the soul decides, and you have to listen to your soul. And I'm thinking, I better be in agreement with my soul. And so then I find that wherever I have this pain or wherever I have this discomfort, and wherever I have picked up a boo-boo has been a point of conflict. And I had never even considered that it could be transgenerational. But the one thing that I do know is that it doesn't need to be transgenerational, because if you look at the notion of two brothers and you say, well, two brothers from the same family, they should be loving siblings. You have this sibling rivalry maybe when they're younger, but when the brothers grow up, they should be the best of friends, because they say, well, blood is thicker than water. Yeah, right. But what happens when you see brothers arguing? Or what happens when you see brothers fighting against each other? And I don't know many war stories myself, but it was really pronounced in the American Civil War, where brothers would fight against brothers. Uh, and it was a bragging thing, so, well, I'm fighting for the South and I'm fighting for the North, and brothers would fight amongst each other. And then you realize, well, wait a second, if blood is thicker than water, and so the family becomes important, is that your brother? Or is that a brother born in the same environment? And so by man-made definition, that becomes your brother. Can a brother be a brother from another family? Why not? Can a partner be from another family? Isn't that what, a husband and wife are? A partnership? And aren't they from different families? So if blood is thicker than water, how does that apply in that relationship? And even, have you heard of, blood brothers, or, having a oath bound in blood, and things like that? So you said, well, okay, well, you're not of the same family, but, you're kind of creating a mystique as if you're part of the same family, and so I will fight and I will protect you, because, we're brothers in arms. So brothers don't have to be genetic. Brothers don't have to be transgenerational. I don't need to carry forward, say, 2 generations down the road, let's say, because it's out of my control, let's say, and there's a mass murderer in my ancestry. Do I need to carry that burden of that universal transgression with me. I'm just asking, do I need to do that? Or can I, disown that and say, that's the reason I'm here, is to offset that, is to balance the books, if you will. It's not my doing, but through the past that I came here, my RNA, which rode the transmission of the cosmic rays, passed through that generation and experienced that. And so that is bound within the energy fields of that cosmic ray. Do I have to absorb that? That's the question. I don't have to absorb that.
Correct.
Because I have a choice, right?
Absolutely.
Imagine, when you were a child in school and the teacher asked you, well, oh, Marky, what do you want to be when you grow up? Do you want to be a policeman? You want to be a fireman? You want to be a doctor?
Yeah.
And you say, well, I want to be what my dad is. Oh, really? And what does your dad do? Well, my dad's a mass murderer. It's perfectly normal that you'd want to be what your dad is. Yeah, you want to walk in your daddy's footsteps, but
Yeah.
there's some things that you
Yeah.
don't want to share.
Mm.
And do you know what you're saying? And what does that mean? So when
Yeah, very good. Yeah, we know we can elevate the souls that came before us as well. I know you said, as you said, the fields have to balance at a certain point. This is the law of the plasma. And that's what he was saying about the ones that have ordered the bullets or ordered the different things there. The fields will have to balance. Screen, we see it now. Thank you, Alex.
okay, I think it's going to happen.
Your screen has come up. And now we're seeing the periodic table. Or part of it.
Yes, and I think it's an important part. I want to draw reference to the magnesium, which has a mass of 12, and the iron, which has a mass of 26. And yeah, I don't know what to say about that too much, but how about this? So we understand the star formation and the tetrahedrons and basically how they work. If you take your two fingers, index finger and your middle finger, and put them on the table facing each other, and then you turn one 90 degrees, so that makes a tetrahedron. So in other words, if you look at the nitrogen, and you put one finger from your one of the two fingers from your left hand on two of the nitrogen, and then your fingers on the other from the right hand on the other two nitrogen, and you just turn them 90 degrees, you'll have the third dimension of this two-dimensional diagram, right? With the magnesium at the center. So this is the plant chlorophyll. And if you look at on the right-hand side, it's the same structure, except that iron is in the center. And then when you look at the diagram and you see the similarity, and in fact, they're almost identical in every which way, except for positioning. And so we find that the chlorophyll is the, shall we say, the blood of the plants, and the hemoglobin, of course, is the blood of the horizontal people. And when you look at the orientation maybe that's the difference. The vertical people are vertical, and the horizontal people are horizontal. And we're part of the horizontal group, aren't we? Because we have this duality. We could be vertical and horizontal. So the thing is that this is a structure, an inherent structure of the amino acid structure. And we see the relationship and how it is actually works quite well together. Very comparative. What is the common point in this? Is that the plants, generally speaking, are peaceful. We're the problem children. And so, where have we gone wrong, shall we say? So that's the discussion. But anyway, I think when he talks about the three dimensions and how they come together, you've got the original pattern, you have the manifestation of the soul, and then you have the manifestation of the physicality. Back to you, Mark.
So the red blood linked to the iron, and that would include the horizontal people? They seem
Yes.
to have a red blood, and the green blood is linking to the magnesium, and this is the plant world and the trees, the vertical people, we call them.
And Alex, what is R? Because I can see hydrogen is listed in the human hemoglobin. And in the chlorophyll.
It's another structure.
Mhm.
It's a compound structure that comes as a result of this. What you're looking at is the factory. Okay, so okay.
The energy factory.
Yeah, figures Gail would ask that question.
Oh,
she's so brilliant.
I'm just observant. I want to know, why is there an R there?
Well,
Thanks.
you are observant. You are observant, and so we have to understand that all this has to do with the conversion of energy, and energy in what we call nature, we call sugar. Well, when we say nature, we're talking about the vertical, horizontal, earth, space, and nature. So just to identify the energy, we call it sugar. So in the whole process of deriving the energy from our food, so where we exchange energy with the horizontal people and the vertical people, is in this hexagonal, pentagonal relationship. So there's a constant shifting. So when I said you take the left hand and the right hand and you put your fingers on the end points, but you turn one hand 90 degrees, well, yeah, you have to understand that this thing is constantly flipping. So you flip it up, you flip it down, you flip it up, you flip it down. So when you flip it up, you give, and when you flip it down, you take. When you flip it up, you give, when you flip it down, you take. And the trigger for the twisting is actually the giving and taking of the energy. So when the condition changes, when the energy is given, that condition changes, so it causes this twisting. And then when the energy comes, that changes again, another twist, and then it twists back up. So you have to look at the two pictures on the left and right as constantly flipping. And this sugar energy exchange is common between the horizontal and the vertical people. And the structure of the energy exchange is common. So this being the final structure. And what is important to understand about the nitrogen, of course, is that if you add energy, it's oxygen, and if you subtract energy, it's carbon. And so that's what the flipping is doing. It's always adding and taking. So there are three positions: the adding, the balance, and then the giving. And so we kind of go through these 3 sessions, and then these are the fundamental 3 dimensions of each energy transmission step.
And Randy would like to know, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, that's
No,
okay.
Randy would like to know, is the Venus flytrap plant aggressive or passive? And we know the Venus flytrap catches flies in its sticky sap or whatever it has there and then pulls that fly in. So maybe they're not long-lived. I don't know.
Okay, so the thing we have to understand is that we have 80 billion people on this planet. So what that means is we're all part of the human species, but each of us is unique. And so that's as a species. And so each species is also unique. And so when we look at this uniqueness, we see that there's a variety of horizontal people, there's a variety of vertical people. So any variety that you see is caused by a deviation from this fundamental structure. And that's really all it is. And the reason for that, of course, is because each of these structures is a byproduct of the cosmic rays. And since the cosmic rays are coming from all over the universe, each one is coming with a different path. And in the process of moving, it has to absorb energy. And then when it moves, it gives the energy. It has to give the energy in order to move. And then by moving, it absorbs the energy. So therefore, the energy that was absorbed from the first position is different from the energy that was absorbed from the second position. If we were to look at twins and you say they're identical, well, no, they're not. One was born before the other. It just so happens that they were born very, very closely to the same time, but not the same time. But they were part of the same overall experience. So this whole notion of cloning is like virtually impossible, because there will always be a difference. There has to be a difference, because if there wasn't a difference, there would be no movement. And if there's no movement, there wouldn't be any life. Back to you, Mark.
Okay.
Alex, before you leave, Alex, real quick. So how is it that the energy of the sphere is complete, but the energy of the circle is not? Because circle, I will assume, has the totality from one point end to it gets back to the beginning, but then it looks like the energy of the sphere is a complete energy, but not like a circle. A circle is a perfect circle, but a sphere is not perfect, but yet is the energy of it is complete. How is this so?
Well, this is the whole point. You have to have a basis. You have to have a foundation. You have to have a maggrav. And that maggrav is only visible when the energy is being exchanged. If there's no energy being exchanged, and that maggrav is not visible, it's in total balance. But if it was in total balance, it also wouldn't exist. So when we're looking at, for instance, the gaps between the rings, you see there's nothing there, or the big gap between the ring and the body of Saturn. That's a huge gap. And you say, well, there's nothing is there. Well, of course there's something there. You just can't see it because it's of a different energy state. And so in which dimension is it? It's the manifestation of the sphere is in 3 dimensions. The manifestation of the rings is in 3 dimensions. And you can see those manifestations. So the manifestation of the gap is in 3 dimensions, but not in the visible dimensions.
Are you saying the plants have learned how to use their magrav before mankind has? I was very impressed when Mr. Kesh said man lives to be 100 years old and is quite proud of that. I know there's many who have, but not a lot. But yet he said when you look at the olive trees in Italy, some of them are 2,500 years old. Does this consuming of energies rather than the matter state, and not all plants, we know there's annuals and we know some plants don't live that long. A redwood tree's 400 years or something like this. Is using these energies actually extending the life of the plant? Or some plants, some vertical people? They don't have a tongue or a mouth to tell us and they're keeping their secrets, but it seems they've learned how to use their magrev before mankind has in a way.
Well, the sad truth for environmentalists, and especially those who are on the climate change bandwagon, is that this planet doesn't need us to survive. If you look at any community and in the absence of man, the plants will do quite well, thank you. And interestingly enough, and we only have to draw our attention to Chernobyl, because that has been evacuated by humanity. And yet we see dogs and other animals in there. So the plants there and the animals there are not human dependent. So we are a bit of a luxury as far as this planet is concerned. And that's why we came here, because this planet is heaven. So as long as we do what the vertical people are doing and the horizontal people are doing, humanity is welcome. But you know, when we start to be belligerent, I think the Earth space will be quite happy to get rid of us.
Fo has put a comment in here. Maybe you have to look at the conversion of the CO2, then calcium is right in between. And how is energy of the rays stored in vegetation and the animals, 2 sides of the metal? No.
Well, this is, you know, scientists are racking their brains over this, trying to figure it out. The problem has been here is that what we're looking at is the Earth space range details. So these are not the cause or the process. These are the end products, and the end product is in the physical state. And we have an additional feature in that we can move, we can move on our own, and you know, there's other things that we can do, and in fact we can abide by universal rules, or we can inflict our own rules, man-made rules. When I think if we understand the universal laws of nature, then we can understand which one is preferred. Back to you. Thanks very much, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Alex, for sharing some intimate details. Ying has put in the chat, but I know I had felt fall down and I wake up a couple of times. When I awake, the meeting 20 minutes left. I don't know. Did I miss anything? I slept most of the time. Is so relaxed. Yes, I'm sure something happened to each and every one of us. Sometimes people will notice it immediately, days after, or even weeks after. But things are changing on the, again, slowly. You can't do a major reconstruction all at the same time. I think if you ask doctors who rebuild certain things on people, they'll tell you that. They have to do it in stages, and this is what's happening to us, only to develop the system that the others will be able to enjoy it. And
Well, we
that's
have
the
to be kind
video.
to our-
Go ahead, sorry.
We have to be kind to ourselves because the healing process consumes an enormous amount of energy. So, you know, we have to take that into account, and all of us are going through this kind of healing process because we're all on a troubled planet. So, you know, it's unavoidable. But we're now coming to the realization that we don't have to carry this baggage. And as soon as we can identify it, you know, and then we can say, oh, that is baggage. I don't need to carry it. And then now I have a choice to do that. And then in that process, you find it's a healing process. Thanks very much, Mark.
Right. Thank you, Alex. And thanks to each and every one of the participants. And may you be proud of the work you do. And we're talking even to the souls that are here in the dimension of energy. May you be proud of the work you do. May you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you make. So thank you very much for picking up this beautiful flower of peace and moving it forward. And of course, we always know these three wise men we should keep in and around us. I think this is a beautiful, complete shield of protection in so many ways for all of us about applying and practicing this thinking good, the speaking good, and the doing or acting good. And again, it's easier said than done, but it's something I think we'll carry with us now through eternity. So you may want to, again, revisit this understanding of the thinking, speaking, and doing good and apply it to each situation in your life, even though you may feel justified in lowering a soul or taking away from the soul. The correct position is to add to the soul. And by thinking good, by speaking good, and by acting good, you are adding to other souls rather than taking away or causing a word or something that would hurt the other person. And again, it's a lesson for each one of us. I'm not in your universe, and you're in a way not in my universe. And so we all have to work this out in so many ways for ourselves.